Cersei Lannister had known the silence of the Red Keep's halls at midnight more intimately than any living soul. She had once ruled these corridors with the might of a golden lioness, fearsome in word and deed, crowned in gold and garbed in regal black. For so long, the castle had shuddered at her whim. Yet now, the hush felt different. An eerie hush, pregnant with the tension of conspiracies and half-remembered sins. It was the hush of the precarious hours before dawn, when everything that had once seemed inevitable might yet unravel. And on this night, everything did. Steel clashed in the courtyard below, echoing across stone walls, and flickering torchlight revealed the silhouettes of men locked in a sudden, savage skirmish. Cersei stood upon a balcony outside her bedchamber, clad in a thin robe of shimmering green. Her hair lay loose about her shoulders, longer than the cropped style she had once worn, symbol of her humiliations past. But she was still queen in her own mind, still the Lannister lion who roared when cornered. She had been expecting a violent turn for some time. The small council had grown fractious. There were half a dozen petty lords or knights who had begun to covet more than they possessed. Now it seemed they had found their moment. From below, men loyal to one banner or another stabbed and shoved, meeting in a confusion of betrayal. Cersei leaned forward and recognized the golden armor of some few still faithful to House Lannister. Their cries bled into the greater tumult. She noticed others wearing the sigil of House Tyrell, though Marjorie's line was effectively extinguished. Or were these Tyrell men simply sellswords wearing the rose? In the darkness, alliances could change as easily as one switch to surcoat. No matter, Cersei had already placed her trust in the red-garbed Queen's Guard she had cultivated in recent moons, men who swore personal fealty to her. But they were outnumbered, or so it appeared. She turned sharply, re-entering her bedchamber. There was no time to linger on a balcony, playing the silent observer. She must act. There was a slender chance this uprising could be suppressed by dawn if she rallied her resources swiftly. She let her robe fall, hastily slipped into a gown of black velvet. She secured a dagger in a hidden sheath strapped to her thigh, then called for the attendants who should have been at her beck and call. No one answered. The corridor outside yawned wide and empty, lit only by sputtering torches. A single body lay crumpled near the door, a guard, young, fresh-faced, wearing an expression of surprise and death. Cersei halted only for a moment, but she cursed softly. If this was the measure of the night's events, then the upheaval had already swept deeper into the Red Keep than she had anticipated. Moving with swift urgency, she glided along the hall. Each corner brought the possibility of an ambush. She knew these halls too well, had wandered them since she was little more than a girl on her father's arm. The hush now pressed on her ears with suffocating weight. She reached the main stair that led down toward the heart of the keep. One step, two, then a rush of air behind her. She spun and had her dagger out just in time to see a hooded figure lunge. Steel met steel, and the clang sent shocks up her arms. Cersei felt her heart hammer in her chest. By the flickering torchlight, she recognized the shape of his face. It was Ser Laurent, a man she had once kept close but had grown suspicious of. A traitor's face. He was skilled, but her desperation was fierce. She feinted left, slashed with the dagger, and felt it bite into flesh. Ser Laurent hissed in pain, but recovered. Another clash, and she stumbled back, narrowly saving her neck. In that moment, she realized. She had not fought for her life in close quarters like this since her youth, and then rarely. Her power had usually been in cunning and commanding others. Now she was forced to rely on her own hand, which trembled with adrenaline. The man rushed her again, pinning her against the wall. The dagger tumbled from her grip. His sword pressed to her collarbone, dangerously near her throat. "You should have died with your children, Cersei," he growled through clenched teeth. "All of your line is gone. It's time to let the realm heal." She reached up, grabbed the back of his neck, and spat in his face with all the venom in her heart. "You are nothing," she hissed. "Do you think you'll live to see sunrise after killing a lioness?" Her eyes burned with hate. "You'll be torn apart by the next dog that fancies itself a wolf." He hesitated for the barest moment, blinking away her spittle and the shock of her vehemence. It was enough. Her knee snapped up into his groin. With a choked cry, he staggered, sword arm faltering. Cersei wrenched free and wove aside, stooping to snatch her dagger again. With one savage thrust, she buried it in his gut. The man's eyes bulged. He collapsed to his knees, and blood stained the stone. "You made a grave mistake," she whispered, twisting the blade before yanking it free. "I am not so easily dispatched." She left him to bleed out, continuing down the stair. This coup or revolt, whatever it was, had been timed carefully, of that much she was certain. She needed to find Qyburn, or the few loyal knights left. A part of her mind recalled that Qyburn was gone, exiled or dead, or else vanished in some scheme. She remembered faintly that she had not seen him for weeks. She cursed under her breath again. With the mountain also gone, she lacked her monstrous champion. She hurried onward, all the while hearing the riot of conflict in distant corners of the keep. In the yard, the fighting was more intense. She glimpsed from a narrow window men in black cloaks turning on those in the Lannister red, cutting them down with practiced efficiency. Her head pounded with fury. Who dared muster so many within the Red Keep's walls? She had become so wary of threats from outside, Targaryen threats, Stark threats, Baratheon pretenders, that she had failed to realize the greatest threat might come from those who had once worn her colors. Or was it one of the smaller houses she had offended, whose loyalty she had spurned? Yes, a coalition of scorned vassals, or perhaps a cunning new master had bought them all. She had one objective now: survive until daybreak. If she could hold out that long, she might still find a way to turn the tide. The realm was fractious, but uncertain. If Cersei lived, she could still raise men from parts of the Crownlands. The city might still fear her enough. She knew how to leverage fear. She burst out into the open yard at last, crouching behind a broken wagon. She heard screams, swords on steel. Corpses littered the flagstones, blood running in rivulets across the cracks. The stench was already thick in the cool night air. She spotted a group of her queen's guard, 5 strong, with that distinctive scarlet cloak. They were pinned against the stables by a surging wave of attackers. Desperate to rally them, she stepped forward with regal authority. "Stand!" she cried, her voice carrying in that fierce ring that had once commanded thousands. "I am your queen." 2 of the attackers spun around. For an instant, confusion danced in their eyes. They had not expected to see Cersei Lannister striding through the carnage unarmored and alive. That hesitation allowed the Queen's Guard to cut down one foe. The other reeled away, hollering something about finding the witch. The guard recognized their queen and rushed to her, forming a hasty defensive ring around her person, eyes darting everywhere. "My queen!" gasped their captain, Ser Danwell, bruised and bloodied behind his visor. "We're overwhelmed. Who leads this rabble?" she demanded. He shook his head. "We don't know. They strike everywhere at once, from the upper floors to the dungeons. Half your court is either dead or in flight." Cersei drew herself up, ignoring the dryness in her throat. "We cut our way free. We rally the gold cloaks in the city if we must." "My queen, do as I command," she snapped, her voice giving no quarter. If they refused, she would be done for. But they moved to obey, forging a small wedge of steel and muscle around her. She fell into step behind them, dagger in hand, scanning the courtyard for the most accessible route. The castle's main gates might already be compromised, but if they pressed through quickly, they might slip away under cover of night. They made it perhaps 20 yards across the yard before a tall figure stepped into their path, sword gleaming. Several followers fanned out behind him, all in black and gray. The torchlight revealed the commander's face. Ser Lancel Farman, a knight with no love for Lannisters. Another name on her mental list of once allied houses turned foe. She had slighted him and his kin years past. She had never guessed he would have the audacity or the cunning to challenge her so blatantly. A twisted smile curled his lips. "Queen Cersei," he mocked. "You would flee your own castle?" She sneered. "You speak of flight, but it is I who stand here unarmored, while you skulk in shadows with your cutthroats." Farman gave a harsh laugh. "You mistake me if you believe this is skulking. The realm is done with your line. It ends here." His men attacked with sudden savagery, and her queen's guard locked shields. Swords rose, fell, rang, and men shrieked. Cersei herself slashed at a soldier who lunged at her. He tried to parry, but she sidestepped him with a dancer's economy of movement and drove her blade into the side of his neck. A spurt of hot blood spattered her face. She recoiled, feeling it drip down her cheek, but she had no time for revulsion. Another soldier closed in. Ser Danwell interposed, smashing a mailed fist into the attacker's jaw. Farman himself was skilled, far more skilled than Cersei had ever realized. He cut down one of the guard with a single deft stroke that severed half the man's neck. The guard collapsed in a heap, choking on his own blood. Another guard roared in anguish and tried to avenge his comrade, but Farman parried with a savage grace, letting the man's momentum carry him forward before impaling him through the chest. Two of her guard were gone in as many heartbeats, and the rest were forced backward by Farman's followers. Farman advanced on Cersei. She gritted her teeth, feeling an unfamiliar panic in her gut. "Jaime is gone. Tyrion is a traitor. My father is dust." It was left to her alone. He brought his sword around in a powerful horizontal slash. She dodged, but not far enough. The blade caught the edge of her gown, tearing a wide gash in the fabric and drawing a shallow cut across her ribs. She staggered, pained, pressing a hand to the wound. In that moment, Farman's men pressed forward, clashing with the last of her guard, who shouted for her to run. Then Farman pivoted, blade aimed for her throat. He nearly succeeded in beheading her on the spot, but Ser Danwell leapt forward, blocking the blow at the cost of his own life. The sword bit deep into Danwell's head. A sickening crack, and the loyal guard toppled. Cersei let out a cry, rage, horror, desperation all at once. She lunged for Farman, dagger extended. He whirled with cold precision. She felt a burst of impact, then fiery pain. She glanced down and saw his blade had run her through her lower torso. Her dagger dropped from limp fingers. He yanked the sword free, and blood poured from the wound, sudden and warm, soaking her gown and her trembling hands. Dimly, she heard the last of her guards being cut down. Farman's men advanced, but he raised a hand to halt them, wanting the final blow for himself. Cersei sank to her knees, breath shuddering. The cold stone pressed into her. With a savage grin, Farman stood over her. She tried to speak, but blood bubbled from her lips. She was too weak to even raise a hand in protest. The world spun, and a curious darkness gnawed at the edges of her vision. She thought of Jaime, of her children, of every slight and triumph. Cersei Lannister, last of her line to hold power. She felt a hot tear roll down her cheek. No, this is not how a lioness should die. Like cornered prey in her own yard, done in by upstart traitors, she collapsed to the flagstones. The torch's glow wavered, and her sight blurred. Her hearing went muffled, as if she were descending into deep water. Then, in that final moment before the dark claimed her, she heard a voice call out. A voice she almost recognized, but not quite. Words drifted, faint and distorted. "Stop! Her time is not ended." Then the darkness swallowed her. Cersei's next awareness was of pain. Unbelievable, searing pain that tore her out of oblivion and back into her body. She gasped, arching her back. Her arms thrashed, and she felt hands pressing her down. For a moment she thought she was still in the yard, that Farman and his men were rending her to pieces. But it was not the Red Keep's yard around her. It was darkness, lit by flickering red flames, torches, braziers, and something that smelled of incense or foreign oils. Her throat burned, and her lungs heaved. She coughed blood. A scarlet-robed figure leaned over her. Melisandre of Ass-High, eyes like embers, hair like living flame. The sorceress priestess. Cersei tried to speak, but her voice emerged only as a ragged croak. She felt as though a war was being waged inside her chest. Her skin was slick with sweat, and the wound in her abdomen was bandaged, though fresh blood seeped through. She inhaled a stench like burnt cloth and realized it came from the braziers, where something foul-smelling and ashen was being consumed in flame. Melisandre's cool, alabaster fingers touched Cersei's cheek, tilting her head to face the priestess. "You live again," the Red Woman said softly, in that accent which always made her sound strangely calm no matter the words. Cersei summoned enough strength to rasp. "How? Where?" "We are beneath the Red Keep," Melisandre replied, "in a secret chamber, once used for dark deeds. It suits my rights." Cersei's head swam, her mind blurred with disbelief. She remembered the final moments. Farman's blade in her gut, the cold stone under her knees, the bitterness of defeat. She should be dead. She was dead. She realized with sudden horror. "I died." Melisandre's expression was unreadable. "Yes, and Lawler has allowed you to return. You are chosen, my queen." The words bled into Cersei's ears, incomprehensible. "Chosen? I do not worship your red god," she managed. She coughed again, a fit that racked her body, sending agony lancing through her belly. She nearly blacked out anew, but Melisandre steadied her, whispering words in a foreign tongue. The pain receded by degrees, like a tide pulled out by the moon. Her body still felt raw and bruised, but the worst of that searing torment had eased, replaced by a dull ache. "You need not have worshipped him," Melisandre said, her voice low yet insistent. "We do not choose our destinies, only how we face them. You faced death, and death was turned aside. Now you are his instrument, whether you will it or not." Cersei clenched her fists in the darkness. The stone beneath her was cold and damp. She stared at the ceiling, flickering orange in the torchlight, trying to piece together how she had come here. "Why?" she croaked at last. "Why would you?" The Red Priestess smiled, a slight curve of her lips. "The flames showed me your face. They showed me a queen reborn, a lioness of light and shadow. When I felt the Red Keep wake to bloodshed this night, I knew it was your appointed time. I convinced enough of the traitors to let me take your body. They thought I could glean secrets from it or use it as a hostage or some nonsense. They do not know the true power of Lawler's gift." A fresh wave of coughing overtook Cersei, and Melisandre motioned for her to remain still. The Red Woman placed one hand above Cersei's wound, murmuring incantations that thrummed in the air. Cersei felt warmth flow into her flesh, not quite healing, but lessening the dreadful ache. The bandages itched and burned a bit, but she could feel the difference. She was impossibly alive again. "My children," she could barely voice the words. An old grief mingled with confusion bubbled up. She had lost them, each child in turn, thanks to prophecy and fate. Yet she had lived on, or so it had been. Now she was returned to life for what? "Is this your red god's mockery?" Melisandre's eyes gleamed. "All prophecy is but the reflection of truth in the flames. He has more for you to do, and I am but his servant." Cersei's thoughts wheeled, trying to grasp the enormity of what was happening. But she was too weak to rage properly, too stunned to ask more. She lay there in the torchlit darkness, letting the swirling shadows claim her as she drifted between the edges of pain and dream. When next she woke, the pain was a shadow of what it had been, though her body still felt frail. She managed to sit up. The chamber was small, with walls of old stone. A single brazier stood at one side, coals glowing faintly, and a heavy door on the opposite wall remained barred. Melisandre was seated cross-legged near the brazier, chanting in low tones. Her red gown shimmered like living embers in the dimness. The moment Cersei stirred, the priestess stood and approached. "You recover," she observed. "It has been a day and a night. A day and a night. That was all?" Cersei tested her arms, flexed her fingers. She was stiff, but she could manage. Her wound was bound beneath fresh bandages. She swallowed, feeling a hunger in her belly. "Have you any food?" she asked, hating the vulnerable note in her voice. Melisandre inclined her head. "Some bread and broth," She handed over a small bowl. Cersei tested the broth. It was bland, but warm, and she forced it down. As she ate, Melisandre said, "The coup was swift. Farman and his allies seized the castle. They believe you dead, your body vanished, they say. The city's mood is unsettled, but some have welcomed a change in power. The lioness of House Lannister had grown unpopular." Cersei scowled, seizing on a faint flicker of anger to ground herself. "Unpopular or not, the Iron Throne is mine. Farman is a whelp. The city will reject him soon enough, or else he will tear himself apart with any allies he's made." She glanced at the priestess. "You said you saw me in your flames. You brought me back to life. Why? What do you want from me?" Melisandre studied her with an unreadable expression. "Long have I served the will of R'hllor, the Lord of Light. I once believed Stannis Baratheon to be Azor Ahai reborn, my mistake. I placed my faith in others after that. But the true war is not over. There are other powers stirring in the east, in the north, and even across the seas. Winter has come and gone, in one form or another, but darkness is never truly banished. The realm needs someone else to burn away the illusions and stand as a champion. I have gazed into the flames, searching for the champion who will hold darkness at bay, and the flames have revealed that a woman in gold and black, a lion of cunning and ferocity, has a role to play. I saw your face. I saw you rise from death. Thus I came." Cersei found the notion absurd. She was no champion for any cause but her own. Yet she could not deny the raw truth. She had died and was now breathing again. Something had saved her, or cursed her. The memory of that final moment, the sword running her through, made her shiver. "So you think I am your new champion?" she asked, half scoffing, half uncertain. "Chosen by R'hllor, yes. A queen reborn, bearing the flame of life in her breast. I saw you crowned in a blaze that sea, consumed the shadows." It sounded dangerously close to prophecy or madness. Cersei's lips curled in skepticism. "I don't care about your god or your prophecies. I want my throne." Melisandre's face remained serene. They may be the same desire in the end. Cersei took another spoonful of broth, ignoring how her hand trembled. She had to think. If the city believed her dead, that gave her a certain advantage if she could emerge at the right moment, rally old allies or bribe new ones. But who remained loyal? Her gold cloaks? How thoroughly had Farman rooted them out? Her thoughts turned to the few cunning lords who might be swayed or threatened back into her orbit. Then a flicker of an older memory rose. The day she had forced the faith militant to kneel, the day she had orchestrated the destruction of the Great September. She had used wildfire then. The memory of that blaze, that roar of green fire, still made her heart pound with a dark exultation. She had annihilated her enemies in one stroke. Perhaps a new stroke was required. "You have some plan," she said slowly to Melisandre. "Or else you would not have gone to such lengths." The Red Priestess's eyes narrowed with quiet intensity. "I do what the Lord of Light guides me to do. My plan is to see you restored, that your new purpose might unfold. I can slip you from these dungeons and out of the city if you so wish, hide you until you are strong enough to return with force, or you may reveal yourself immediately, shattering the traitor's newfound victory." An old cunning stirred in Cersei's breast. "To reveal myself too soon is to invite all of them to unite against me. No, we need cunning, but I also cannot abide hiding like some timid mouse." She set the empty bowl aside, ignoring the weakness that still gnawed at her. "Take me from here quietly. We will see who in the city might bend." Melisandre nodded. "There is a way, tunnels beneath the keep. The watchers above suspect nothing of your survival, so they will not guard for your escape. Once you are free, you can call on those in the city who bear House Lannister's coin or favor. And there may be others." Cersei frowned. "Others?" Melisandre's gaze flicked to the brazier, where coals glowed like eyes in the night. "R'hllor has many followers. Some dwell in secret, some in open sight. I have brought a few with me, men from the east who heed the Lord of Light. They will do as I command." Cersei considered. She hated feeling indebted to this red sorceress, But in truth, she had little choice. She needed armed men and a safe place to plot her return. She nodded, though the motion made her head throb. "Good, let us depart. I will need time for my wound to heal, and for that, I require a secure refuge." Melisandre gave a small bow. "I shall show you the way." Thus began the next stage of Cersei's life, her second life, if she was honest. She rose unsteadily, leaning on the priestess's arm, every step sending jolts of pain up her abdomen. She forced herself onward regardless, refusing to show more weakness than necessary. They took a torch and unbarred the heavy door, entering a cramped corridor that stank of mold and stale water. The Red Keep was honeycombed with secret tunnels, many known only to the Targaryens of old or to Varys, the Spider. Yet Melisandre seemed to know them as well. She led without hesitation, steps echoing softly on cold stone, guiding the queen through twisting passages lit by guttering torches or sometimes just the faint glow of the priestess's eyes. At one juncture, they nearly stumbled upon a pair of armed men searching for contraband or hidden cells. Cersei's heart hammered in her ears as they ducked behind a low buttress. Their footsteps receded, and silence returned. Eventually, the corridors ascended, bringing them to a small postern door that led outside the castle walls. The door was locked, but Melisandre produced a strange metal key from within her robes and turned it carefully in the ancient mechanism. With a creak, the door opened to the night air. Outside, King's Landing sprawled across the hills. The city was dark, save for scattered lights in windows and the glow of torches near the main gates. The Red Keep loomed above them on its rocky promontory. In the distance, the waters of Blackwater Bay shone silver beneath a crescent moon. The air smelled of salt and sewage, but to Cersei, it was a welcome change from the cloying, incense-laden gloom below. She stepped forward, gritting her teeth against the pain that gnawed her. It was late or early, the moon riding high. This part of the city was mostly deserted, for the hour was well past. Farman's men had consolidated their watch around the castle gates, apparently not troubling themselves with the postern. Melisandre guided her to a small wagon waiting in a shadowed corner of a side street. A pair of hooded figures stood by it, men of the East, by their accents and the tilt of their eyes. They inclined their heads in silent deference to Melisandre, and thus to Cersei as well. Inside the wagon, they covered her with coarse blankets and straw, as if she were mere cargo. Her pride bristled at the humiliation, but she understood the necessity. She endured the jostling ride through narrow, winding streets. The city was hardly asleep. Some raucous laughter echoed from taverns, but no one paid them heed. Soon, they reached the crowded slums near Flea Bottom, where the wagon pulled into a courtyard behind a dilapidated building. A short staircase led down to a hidden cellar. It was larger than she expected. Tapestries of red and gold hung from the walls, and a heavy table occupied the center of the space. Light flickered from lamps placed on wooden beams. There was a bedchamber partitioned off, furnished with a simple cot. A faint odor of spices and perfumed oils lingered in the air. Small shrines to Lawler lined one corner. Melisandre dismissed the wagon's drivers to keep watch outside, and then she helped Cersei to the cot. "You will be safe here," said the priestess. "For a time, my men will see that no unwelcome guests intrude. Rest, and I shall see to your bandages." Cersei sank onto the cot, feeling exhaustion swamp her body. She had never felt so worn, even after giving birth to her children. Death had stolen so much from her, and resurrection left her feeling raw, unsteady. Despite her innate distrust of Melisandre's magic, she found she was too tired to resist as the Red Woman gently unwrapped the stained bandages, cleansed the wound with a pungent herbal mixture, and pressed a warm cloth against it. The pain was sharp, but she swallowed her cries. She was queen, after all. She drifted in and out of a haze, aware of Melisandre chanting softly, pressing her palm against the wound, heat radiating. Cersei's mind wandered to old regrets, old foes. She pictured Tyrion's face, and hatred smoldered within her. She recalled the youth of Marjorie Tyrell, and of Sansa Stark so many years ago, and she felt that old wave of scorn and resentment. Yet a new notion took shape. She had been bested, defeated, slain, and only by a freakish twist of foreign sorcery had she returned. Was it possible that she might channel this power to crush her enemies once and for all? She let the darkness behind her eyelids swirl, thinking of wildfire, of the city's capacity for riot, of secret alliances. She was no stranger to the game of power. And then, as if from a great distance, she heard Melisandre's voice whisper, "Sleep, lioness. Tomorrow you begin anew." Cersei let the blackness take her. When morning came, if one could call it morning in the windowless cellar, Cersei woke to the dull throb of her wound, but she could stand. She found a fresh set of clothes folded at the foot of her cot. Not her usual silks or velvets, but a serviceable tunic and breeches. She eyed them with distaste but saw no alternative. She dressed with slow, careful movements, mindful of the ache in her abdomen. In the main chamber, Melisandre waited with a meager breakfast of bread and salted fish. Cersei devoured it, scarcely caring about the taste. After she ate, Melisandre placed her hands around a clay cup filled with dark liquid. "Drink this," she said softly. "It will aid the healing." Cersei eyed it warily. Poison or miracle? Melisandre's lips quirked. "You know the answer." Cersei sniffed it, grimaced at the bitterness, and forced it down. At once, she felt a warmth spread through her limbs, dulling the pain to a mere nagging twinge. She let out a shaky breath. "We must begin preparations," she said, brushing stray hair from her face. "To retake the Red Keep, I'll need an army. Do we have contact with any of the gold cloaks left in the city?" Melisandre inclined her head. "I have a man who trades in rumors. He says that some gold cloaks deserted their posts when Farman took the keep. They're holed up in the Mudgate district. Others have sworn fealty to the new King's Regent, as Farman styles himself. It is a precarious situation. The city's common folk do not mourn you. I must be plain. They see you as cruel and vain. Farman, at least, is a lesser-known quantity." Cersei pressed her lips into a thin line. She did not expect love from the small folk. She had never truly cared about their adoration, only their obedience. "We need something to shift the tide of sentiment. Rumors that I live might not suffice unless I show them that I am stronger than these traitors." Melisandre's gaze flicked to her shrines. "A display of power, perhaps, or a demonstration of your renewed authority. If you appear in the city, proclaiming your survival and anathema on those who betrayed you, the gold cloaks who remain loyal could rally. The small folk might bow out of fear or confusion, but you must do it swiftly, before Farman cements alliances with neighboring lords. Word travels fast." Cersei mulled this over. "We strike soon, then. I'll appear at the Great September, what remains of it." She added with a small, derisive laugh at the memory of how she had destroyed the place. "Well, whichever sept can still hold an audience. Let the pious recoil when they see me returned from death. That alone might sow awe or terror. Then, from there, we march on the castle." "And with whom do we march?" Melisandre asked. She seemed genuinely curious, not mocking. Cersei exhaled. "We gather the gold cloaks from the Mudgate. We pay them, we promise them whatever coin is needed to lure them. Then we gather any sellswords for hire in the city. We threaten the lesser houses that remain in King's Landing. We present them with a simple choice: kneel to the rightful queen or die." Melisandre's expression revealed no judgment. "A plan that suits your nature." She moved to the table and spread out a rough map of the city. "These sellswords, there is a group rumored to be in the harbor, newly arrived from the Free Cities. They call themselves the Brazen Chain. Perhaps we can approach them. I have some knowledge of their leader." Cersei traced the map with her fingertips, recalling the city's layout. "Very well, but let us do so with caution. We cannot afford betrayal at this juncture. I have no illusions about my popularity." Melisandre inclined her head. "Your illusions, my queen, have died with your mortal shell. Now you stand reborn. Perhaps this time, you will not let mortal trifles hinder your destiny." Cersei shot her a sharp look. "Enough talk of gods and destinies. Save your sermons for your shrines. A flicker of something, amusement, crossed Melisandre's face, but the Red Woman bowed her head slightly, and the conversation turned to practicalities. They agreed upon a plan. Melisandre would send her men in pairs to scout for the gold cloaks at Mudgate, to quietly spread word that the Queen yet lived. They would also seek out the Brazen Chain's captain, a certain Myrish sellsword known for cunning bargains. Meanwhile, Cersei would remain hidden, gathering her strength. When a small force was assembled, she would appear at a sept in the city's heart, revealing herself as resurrected by the Lord of Light, displaying that old commanding presence that had once made her name. Then, with intimidation or gold, she would reassert her claim. Cersei took little joy in the notion of claiming any kinship with Lawler, but if the rumor of her return from death lent her a certain terrifying mystique, she would use it. She would employ any tool she could, and she would see Farman's head mounted on a spike. She vowed that to herself with every beat of her resurrected heart. The next few days passed in a tense hush. Cersei kept to the cellar, healing slowly, practicing short walks to strengthen her limbs. Melisandre's herbal concoctions eased her pain, though the wound remained tender. The Red Woman often watched her with a cool gaze, occasionally instructing her in breathing exercises or chanting foreign words that supposedly aided in recuperation. At times, Cersei felt a curious warmth flare in her chest, as if her blood carried the faintest trace of fire. She tried to dismiss it, but some nights, she dreamed of flames dancing around her. Flames that did not burn her flesh, but instead seemed to whisper, "Queen, Queen, Queen." A small group began to gather in the cellar. Disgraced gold cloaks, perhaps a dozen, arrived under cover of night, brought by Melisandre's men. Their faces registered shock at seeing Cersei alive, but shock quickly turned to a guarded awe. She demanded their renewed vows of loyalty, which they gave, though she suspected their fealty would hold only so long as gold or fear bound them. Still, it was enough. Then came a half-dozen Brazen Chain mercenaries, tall men with weathered faces and exotic tattoos. Their captain, a Myrish man named Ravos Doreen, wore scale armor of blackened steel and had a shrewd look in his eye. He studied Cersei's pallor, the bandages around her torso, and the glint of defiance in her stare. With a thin smile, he agreed to fight on her behalf in exchange for a hefty sum, double if they had to storm the Red Keep. "Done," Cersei said coldly, ignoring the tension in her wounded belly. "When I reclaim the throne, House Lannister will ensure you are paid." Doreen nodded. "We march behind the Queen resurrected, as they say in the streets. Word's gone around that some devilry of the Red God has returned you. The common folk whisper you are a walking corpse. They say you have come to punish the traitors. It frightens them." Cersei's lips twitched in satisfaction. "Then the seeds are planted." Melisandre stood by, silent yet present, as if she too recognized the moment. They agreed on the plan. At sunset the following day, Cersei would appear at a modest sept near the Street of Flower, where a small crowd would gather for evening prayers. The gold cloaks and mercenaries would stand by, disguised or waiting in side streets. She would reveal herself, announce her return, and demand the city's obedience. Those who complied would be spared. Those who defied her would burn. It was as simple and brutal as that. Cersei felt a stirring in her chest that was almost excitement. If this worked, she would retake King's Landing without a protracted siege or the need to flee to Casterly Rock. If it failed, well, better to die in open conflict than skulk in cellars. That night, she slept fitfully, half dreaming of standing in the throne room, her seat of power, while flames roared on every side. Shadows flitted across the pillars, shapes reminiscent of dragons or dire wolves or stags, all howling in fury. She stood firm, crowned in gold, a sword of red fire in her hand. Then, from the flames, a voice like Jaime's whispered her name. She woke gasping, heart thudding, sweat plastering her hair to her scalp. Melisandre's silhouette hovered in the open doorway. "Dreams?" the Red Priestess asked softly. Cersei forced herself to steady her breath. "A queen does not discuss her dreams," she said, voice ragged. Melisandre Melisandre let the remark pass. "Tomorrow is the day. You must rest." Cersei nodded. Sleep did not come easily, but eventually exhaustion claimed her again. Sunset the next day found Cersei dressed in black once more, a worn but serviceable gown that Melisandre had procured. She wore a simple cloak with the hood raised. Underneath, she carried a small knife, though her skill with the blade was limited. Her real weapon was the fear she intended to stoke. Together, they left the cellar and made their way through narrow alleys. A pair of brazen-chain mercenaries followed at a discreet distance, with more posted at strategic corners, prepared to converge if trouble arose. King's Landing smelled of sweat and summer heat. The day had been bright, but now the sky was streaked with orange and purple, the sun sinking beyond the rooftops. The sept they aimed for was a modest building of white stone with a domed roof. In the courtyard, a small congregation had gathered for evening prayers. Several septas in pale robes were leading them in a chant of contrition. Cersei's lip curled at the hypocrisy. Cersei waited at the edge of the courtyard, hood lowered over her face, while a hush spread among the worshippers. They must have sensed something amiss, the presence of armed men lurking in the shadows, or the subtle tension in the air. Melisandre stood behind Cersei, silent as a phantom. When the chanting ended, Cersei stepped forward, raising her head to reveal her face. Someone gasped. Another murmured in confusion. Cersei recognized a few of them. City dwellers who had once scraped by on her indulgence or cursed her name. She let her gaze travel across them, let them see the pale cast of her cheeks and the bandages beneath her gown. Then she spoke, her voice ringing across the courtyard. "You see me?" she demanded. "You see Cersei Lannister, who was your queen and whom you called the Mad Queen, the Cruel Queen. You believed me dead, slain by cowards in the night. But I am here. I stand before you, returned by the Lord of Light, so that I may judge those who rose against me." She paused, letting that sink in. "I have come for what is mine, the Iron Throne and the obedience of this city. Any who defy me will burn." A trembling murmur rippled through the crowd. Some dropped to their knees, crossing themselves in supplication. Others backed away in fear. One man, emboldened by desperation or folly, shouted, "Stay away, monster! You killed half this city once already." Cersei turned her blazing gaze upon him. She knew that the rumor of her resurrection worked to her advantage here, and so she slipped into the role of unearthly revenant. "I killed my enemies," she said coldly, "and I shall kill them again if they dare rise against their rightful queen." She flicked her fingers, and from the sidelines came two brazen-chain sellswords who seized the man. He struggled, cursing, but they dragged him before her. She looked down at him, the corner of her mouth curling in contempt. "I was dead," she said, voice carefully pitched to carry. "Yet your betrayal could not keep me in the grave. If you defy me, you defy the powers that brought me back. Do you understand?" He stared at her in fear, face pallid. She saw him glance at Melisandre's red robes and the torch she carried. "I beg your forgiveness," he muttered at last. Cersei turned away. She had proven her point. The sellswords let the man go, and he scuttled back into the crowd, eyes downcast. She strode forward to the sept steps, ignoring the pain in her abdomen. She raised her arms in a commanding gesture. "Hear me now. Ser Lancel Farman, who calls himself King's Regent, murdered me in cold blood and stole my throne. This city cannot serve a murderer who slays its rightful queen. I call on all loyal men to join me. Those who do shall be rewarded. Those who do not shall die." From one corner of the courtyard came the tramp of feet. A contingent of gold cloaks led by a watchful officer. He stepped forward, clearly uneasy, hand on the hilt of his sword. "We heard rumors. It is true, then? You were?" "Slain, yes," Cersei snapped, "but not by any trial or rightful execution. I was stabbed in my own courtyard. Now I have returned." She took a single, agonizing step closer. "Will you kneel to the rightful queen, or do you stand with traitors?" The officer glanced at Melisandre, then at the sellswords lurking in the shadows. moment, he dropped to one knee and bowed his head. His men followed suit, though some with visible reluctance. The crowd stirred and murmured. A small triumph, Cersei thought. She gestured for the men to rise. "Spread the word throughout your ranks," she commanded. "I march on the Red Keep. I expect every gold cloak to stand aside or stand with me. If they do not, they will be named traitors." A sharp hush hung in the courtyard. A night breeze whispered through the open archways. Cersei's chest heaved with adrenaline and lingering pain, but outwardly, she maintained an icy composure. She turned to the crowd. "Return to your homes and speak of what you have seen. Speak of the queen who has broken death itself. I will have no opposition in King's Landing. Now go." Slowly, the crowd dispersed, many of them crossing themselves or casting furtive glances at Melisandre. Within moments, only Cersei's band remained in the courtyard. Several more gold cloaks trickled in from nearby streets, having heard the commotion. When they saw Cersei alive, many paled, some knelt, others merely gawked, but none dared challenge her. She drank in their fear like a parched desert flower. Melisandre stepped to her side. "You have declared yourself," she said quietly. "Farman will hear of it soon." "Good," Cersei replied, though her body quivered with the strain of standing. "Let him cower behind those walls. He can hear the footsteps of the queen he thought he'd killed coming for him." She beckoned to the newly arrived gold cloaks. "Spread out," she told them. "Secure the major streets leading to the keep. We move at dawn." They rushed off to obey. The brazen chain mercenaries fanned out as well, stationing themselves at vantage points. Word would spread like wildfire through the city. Cersei had reappeared, returned from death, come to exact revenge. It was madness, it was terror, but it was exactly the kind of potent rumor that could tip the city's delicate balance. She relished the knowledge. Melisandre's voice intruded softly. "You are wounded still. You need rest." Cersei glanced at her. The Red Woman's concern sounded genuine, though Cersei did not trust it fully. "I'll rest when Farman's head is on a spike," she said, but her voice trembled slightly from the pain. Melisandre lifted a hand as if to offer support. "There is a small tavern near here. One of my men has purchased its use for tonight. Come, your body has been taxed enough." Cersei was about to refuse when a fresh wave of throbbing stabbed her abdomen. Her vision swam. Her resurrection had given her a second chance at life, but it had not made her immune to mortal weakness. She reluctantly allowed Melisandre to guide her, step by step, across the courtyard and into the winding streets. They walked several blocks until they reached a squat, shabby tavern with boarded windows. Inside, it was dim and nearly empty. Just a few of Melisandre's followers who stood guard. A single dusty room upstairs had been set aside for Cersei. She sank onto a bed that creaked under her weight, letting out a trembling exhale. Melisandre placed a water skin in her hands. "Drink," she commanded. "Then I'll tend your bandages." Cersei complied, feeling her pride shrivel at the reliance on this foreign sorceress. But she had no choice. As Melisandre peeled back the makeshift bandages, the queen winced. The wound was bleeding anew, a slow trickle of crimson. Melisandre pressed a cloth to it, chanting quietly, and again that unnatural warmth spread through Cersei's flesh. She closed her eyes, letting the sensation lull her toward a half-sleep. A single tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it, a mixture of relief and anger at her own helplessness. Memories drifted through her mind. Memories of the day she had strolled through the Red Keep at the height of her power, clad in gold, with Jaime at her side, or of the time she had gazed upon Tommen's sleeping face and vowed to protect him from all harm. She had failed him and Myrcella and Joffrey. In truth, she had failed everyone, even herself. But she had another chance now, a chance born of blood and flame and shadows. She would not waste it. Dawn broke over King's Landing with a haze of pink and gray. The city stirred uneasily, as if sensing the conflict to come. Word had traveled fast. Cersei Lannister walked the streets, accompanied by gold cloaks and sellswords. Yet how could that be when she was rumored dead? Some claimed a wraith wore her face. Others swore it was dark magic. But enough believed it to be real that a crowd began to gather near the winding approach to the Red Keep. They wanted a glimpse of this living ghost. Cersei stood at the head of a modest column, perhaps 50 gold cloaks, a score of the brazen chain, and a smattering of onlookers. Melisandre was at her right, a silent sentinel in scarlet robes. The queen's stomach lurched from pain and anticipation, but outwardly, she wore her familiar mask of icy resolve. She advanced up the sloping street. At the top, the Red Keep's great gates loomed, barred and guarded by men in mismatched armor. Farman's forces. She could see them shifting nervously, clearly unsettled by the stories that had reached their ears. Halting her column just out of arrow range, Cersei raised her voice. "Open the gates," she commanded, "or my men will batter them down. I am your queen, rightful and returned. Surrender, and you may yet live." For a moment, no one spoke. Then one guard shouted back, voice quavering, We serve the king's regent, Ser Lancel Farman." Cersei's lip curled. "Farman is a usurper. I give you one last chance. Stand aside or die." Her sellswords and gold cloaks shifted in readiness. The tension was a living thing in the morning air. Cersei caught glimpses of faces peering from nearby windows, wide-eyed with dread or curiosity. Then, from atop the gatehouse, another voice boomed. A voice full of forced bravado. "Cersei Lannister, you are an abomination. The realm will not bow to a demon raised by heretical magic. Begone, or we will cut you down again." Cersei smiled grimly. She raised a hand, signaling her small force to advance. The gold cloaks carrying a heavy ram came forward at a trot. The guards on the walls hesitated, uncertain whether to shoot. Then a scattered volley of crossbow bolts hissed through the air, mostly clattering off the cobblestones or burying themselves in shields. A few found flesh. One gold cloak toppled with a bolt in his throat, gurgling. Cersei's face hardened. "Batter down the gates," she said, voice like steel. "Show them that death cannot stop me." With a bellow, the men began pounding the ram against the gates. Wood splintered under the repeated impacts. More crossbow bolts rained down, but now the sellswords returned fire with shortbows, pinning the defenders behind the crenellations. Cersei stood behind her men, refusing to flinch even as bolts whizzed past. Let them see her unbroken. At length, the gates shuddered and gave way, crashing inward with a thunderous crack. Cersei's vanguard poured through, grappling with defenders who had nowhere to flee. The courtyard erupted in chaos. Men shouted, swords rang, blood spattered the stones. The defenders were outmatched and uncoordinated, many dropping their arms or turning to flee deeper into the keep. Cersei strode through the breach, ignoring the corpses. She had a single goal in mind, the throne room. Melisandre walked beside her, face impassive, as if war were a trivial matter. Guards parted before them, or were cut down by Cersei's sellswords. Smoke drifted in the courtyard from overturned braziers and torches. The rising sun illuminated the tower tops, casting long shadows on the carnage below. They reached the main doors that led to the throne room. They were barred from the inside. Again, the ram was brought forward. Cersei watched as her men shattered those doors as well. Beyond, she saw a cluster of Farman soldiers attempting a desperate stand. She recognized a few faces, traitors who had once served her. She felt a sick satisfaction as her sellswords crashed into them. The clangor of steel resounded in the vaulted entry. "Spread out," she commanded the gold cloaks. "Secure the keep. Find Farman." Some of them obeyed, sprinting down side corridors to sweep the castle. Cersei marched forward, limping slightly from her wound, though she refused to show more weakness than that. At the threshold of the throne room, she paused. A swirl of dust hung in the air, lit by sunbeams from the high windows. She inhaled the familiar scent of old stone, musty tapestries, and fear. Then she stepped inside. There, at the foot of the Iron Throne, stood Lancel Farman, pale-faced yet grimly resolved. He had a handful of loyal men arrayed around him. The throne itself loomed behind him, a twisted mass of swords hammered into a seat of power. The sight of it made Cersei's blood pound with an almost supernatural desire. That was her seat. Farman leveled his sword at her. "You should be in the ground," he snarled. "I ended you. How dare you profane the halls of the living?" Cersei approached him, ignoring the blades of his men. Her cell's words and gold cloaks fanned out at the edges of the chamber, prepared for one final confrontation. "You speak of profaning life, yet you murdered your queen in cowardly fashion," she said, voice dripping with contempt. "The Red God saw fit to give me another chance. Who are you to defy the gods?" Farman's eyes darted to Melisandre, who stood behind Cersei like a statue carved from rubies. A flicker of true fear crossed his face, but he set his jaw, raising his chin. "I did the realm a service. Your reign brought only war and ruin. Now I shall finish what I began." He lunged, sword whistling towards Cersei. She stepped back, heart hammering. At once, one of her brazen chain mercenaries intervened, parrying the blow. Farman's men rushed to join the melee, and the throne room became a blur of clanging steel and darting forms. Cersei stumbled back, pressing a hand to her belly where pain flared again. Melisandre seized her arm, steadying her. All around them, the ring of battle echoed. Farman fought fiercely, dispatching one of the brazen chain with a swift thrust that pierced the man's throat. Another cell's word closed in, but Farman spun away, hacking at a gold cloak who tried to flank him. He was a deadly swordsman, but he was outnumbered. Soon he was forced back, step by step, until his back nearly touched the base of the Iron Throne. Cersei advanced, heart burning with rage, ignoring the pain. She snatched a fallen sword from the marble floor. "You took my life once," she said, voice trembling with fury. "You will not take it again." Farman spat, droplets of blood flecking his lip. "Then end this farce," he snapped. "Kill me if you can, abomination." In that moment, she saw not only Farman but every traitor who had ever stood against her, from Ned Stark to the High Sparrow to the Tyrells and Martells and all the rest. Her vision flared red. She fainted with her sword, and Farman blocked, but another gold cloak seized his sword arm from behind, giving Cersei an opening. She drove her blade into his chest, feeling the jolt through her arms. He gasped, eyes wide, blood trickling from his mouth. She twisted the sword savagely. "This is for my throne," she hissed. Then she yanked the blade free, and Farman sagged to his knees, toppling forward onto the stone floor. Silence fell, broken only by ragged breathing and the groans of the wounded. Melisandre watched impassively. The few of Farman's loyal men who survived threw down their arms, surrendering. The gold cloaks and sellswords gathered around, forming a ring around the dais that held the Iron Throne. Cersei dropped the bloody sword, her chest heaving, and turned her gaze upon that seat of power that had defined her life. She ascended the steps, each movement a reminder of the wound that had nearly killed her. She limped but forced herself to move steadily. The throne's twisted metal glinted in the morning sun. Reaching it, she placed a hand on one of the sword hilts that formed its back. She could almost feel the metal humming with dark resonance. How many had died for this seat? How many more would die before she was done? She turned, lowering herself onto the Iron Throne. It was a familiar discomfort, jabbing into her legs and spine. Yet the sting felt reassuring somehow. She stared out at the hall, at the kneeling gold cloaks, the subdued sellswords, and the corpses strewn about. Melisandre stood at the foot of the dais, head slightly bowed. Cersei's voice resonated across the chamber, echoing from the stone pillars. "This city is mine. The throne is mine." She let the declaration ring out. Then she added, cold and regal, "I have returned from death to claim what was always mine by right. Any who question my rule shall meet the fate of these traitors." She caught a flicker of movement from the corner of her eye, Farman's body twitching in the final throes of death, perhaps. She felt no pity. This was her triumph, as hollow and bloody as any she had experienced before. Yet a new chord thrummed in her soul, a sense of grim purpose. She had come back from the darkness. That had to mean something. The hall erupted in a half-hearted cheer from those who had fought for her, or those who wished to placate her. A few watchers in the doorway called out in confusion or alarm. Cersei sank back against the spiked metal of the throne, letting the agony of her wound merge with the twisted pleasure of victory. She was queen again. She was Cersei Lannister, the lioness of House Lannister, the resurrected hand of R'hllor, though she would never speak those words aloud herself. Not truly. Her gaze drifted to Melisandre, whose red robes caught the sunlight in a halo of crimson. The priestess met her eyes with an inscrutable expression. Cersei had no illusions that the Red Woman served only for some greater design of her own. But for now, they were allies of circumstance. The realm had not seen the last of strife. Cersei knew that enemies still lurked beyond these walls. She suspected that the Targaryen remnants or the Stark lines might yet cause trouble. But she did not fear them as she once had. She had cheated death. She was no longer the woman she had been. With effort, she straightened and lifted her chin. "Clear the bodies," she commanded, "and summon the court. Let every lord and lady in the city come to see the queen enthroned." Melisandre nodded. Her lips parted as if she might speak, but she said nothing. The gold cloaks began gathering up the slain. The sellswords lingered, collecting loot from the fallen. Cersei sat unmoving, blood crusting on her black gown, aware that her own life's blood still stained the bandages beneath. She felt cold yet alive, alive beyond all reason. She wondered if her father, Tywin Lannister, would have approved of such a savage retaking. Probably so, yet she had done the unthinkable, transcended even the mortal limits he had known. She allowed herself a faint, weary smile, feeling every ache in her battered body. The Iron Throne pressed into her flesh, reminding her that all power came with pain. In that moment, a whisper seemed to echo through her mind, like distant flames crackling. Perhaps it was only the echo of her own thoughts. "You are chosen," it seemed to say. "You are fire and shadow. You are death and rebirth." She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, letting the wave of dark satisfaction wash over her. Then she opened them again, surveying the throne room. The chamber was hers, the city was hers, and the future was hers to command. Risen from the ashes of her own demise, Cersei Lannister would stop at nothing to tighten her grip on the Seven Kingdoms. And whether that path led her to ultimate glory or final damnation, she would walk it unafraid, for she had already walked through death and emerged crowned anew, touched by the fire of R'hllor, the Red God, whose purposes were shrouded in flame. Let the rest of the world tremble. Cersei lived again. Cersei Lannister sat upon the Iron Throne, aching in body but refusing to reveal any vulnerability. Blood still stiffened the black velvet across her belly where her wound had seeped anew. She felt each breath tug at the raw edges of that wound, a constant reminder that she had, in truth, died. And yet here she was, victorious again, the usurper Farman lying in a congealing pool of his own blood on the throne room floor. Around her, the loyalists and sellswords moved to clear away the corpses. Smoke, dust, and the coppery tang of spilled blood hovered in the air. It was a scene of savage triumph, the kind she had imagined more than once in her darkest hours. But it felt different this time. Everything felt different. The hush that followed that final clash hung heavy. No one seemed to know quite how to behave in the presence of a queen who had risen from her own grave. At the foot of the throne's dais, Melisandre stood with the bearing of an idol carved from living flame. Her red robes drifting around her in faint folds, her posture regal, her face as calm and pale as ever. She caught Cersei's gaze with those ember-bright eyes and offered the slightest tilt of her chin, a silent acknowledgement that everything had transpired as she had foreseen. Cersei longed to dismiss the Red Priestess, to re-establish herself as the sole architect of her victories. But too much had happened in too short a span. She could not deny that Melisandre's intervention, her uncanny knowledge of forbidden arts, had been the key to Cersei's resurrection. Without her, Cersei's body would likely lie rotting in a pauper's grave while Farman and his allies sat gloating in the Red Keep. That debt chafed at her. She would find a way, eventually, to ensure that no one could claim dominion over her. For now, with the wound burning in her side, and the stench of death all around, she could only grit her teeth and accept the role Melisandre played. She took a slow breath, the Iron Throne dug into her back, each blade and rivet pressing against her spine. She remembered a time she had relished that discomfort, thinking it reminded a ruler of the burden of rule. Now it felt like a warning, an unsubtle whisper that she had indeed stepped beyond mortal boundaries. The men and women below stood in a semicircle, a swirl of battered gold cloaks, Sel's words from the brazen chain, and a scattering of lesser courtiers who had not fled in time. Faces stared up at her, uncertain, curious, and more than anything, fearful. She could see in their eyes the reflection of rumor, that she was a corpse woman or a demon, touched by the Red God. Good, she thought. Fear was the iron coin by which she had always purchased compliance. At length, she lifted her chin and spoke in a voice loud enough to echo in the rafters. Bring me whoever survived this little rebellion. Bring me lords, ladies, knights, any who thought to profit by my murder. Show them the mercy they deserve. I will question them. Myself. She saw a flicker of movement among the men. A few gold cloaks, newly sworn to her service, mumbled affirmations and headed off to carry out her order. Some of the brazen chain Sel's words shared looks among themselves, uncertain but also hungry. They would kill whomever she named, as long as the coin flowed. The brazen chain's captain, Ravos Doreen, gave a salute in Cersei's direction, then gestured for his men to help the gold cloaks control the castle corridors. Cersei waited for them to leave before shifting her attention to the survivors who lingered. Close the doors, she commanded. Let no one enter until I give word. One of the men at arms hurried to slam the great doors. A faint reverberation boomed through the throne room. Now there were no distractions to hide behind, no illusions left. The seat of power belonged to Cersei once again. Yet the disarray was impossible to ignore. Bodies still needed clearing. The floors were slippery with congealing blood, and the heavy stench of sweat and terror seemed baked into the walls themselves. Still, Cersei forced herself to rise from the throne, pressing a hand to her side as she stood. The pain was less than it had been, thanks in part to Melisandre's incantations, but she remained weak. She could not show that weakness. In her mind, she imagined a wave of wild energy sustaining her, the memory of death feeding her with a fierce, cold vitality. She stood as tall as she could and descended the dais steps. Her men parted to make way. She heard the rasp of cloth as Melisandre followed, the faint hiss of her robe against the throne room floor. It occurred to Cersei that the priestess was always so silent in her movements, as though she glided above the ground. She did not like it. She did not like how little she understood of the magic that had revived her. But again, she told herself that time would provide answers. For now, the city must be brought to heel. Stepping among the bodies, Cersei glanced down at Farman's corpse. He lay sprawled on his side, eyes bulging, mouth parted in a final, blood-choked gasp. She could not deny a certain grim satisfaction at the sight of her killer so undone, but she also felt a deeper, more visceral sense of finality. He had ended her life, however briefly. He had forced her to confront the unimaginable. She spat on his corpse without ceremony. One of her new guards cleared his throat. "Your Grace, what shall we do with him?" The man's eyes flicked to Farman's body. "Put his head on a spike," Cersei said coolly. "Let the city see what happens to those who break faith with the rightful queen." The guard bowed and motioned for two others to hoist Farman's corpse away. Blood streaked across the floor where they dragged him. Melisandre stepped closer to Cersei, her voice low so that only she could hear. "You have your victory, but you must secure it. Your enemies will not vanish overnight." Cersei gave a small nod, ignoring the bitterness in her gut at being lectured. "I am aware. I will gather the lords and ladies who remain in King's Landing. They will kneel or they will die." Melisandre's eyes narrowed. And the broader realm? Word will spread of your return. Some will call it blasphemy. Others will find new reasons to challenge your claim. Cersei rounded on her. That is always the way of rulers. Someone always finds reason to challenge us. This changes nothing. The realm's spirit is broken after these endless wars. There is no Baratheon worth the name, no Tyrell heir of note, no Martell with an army behind them. The Targaryen threat is a rumor at best. The North is quiet, minding its own wolves. I hold the capital, and that is power enough to bend the rest to me. Melisandre studied her, as though searching for cracks. Your confidence is impressive, my queen, she said at length. If you will accept my counsel, I suggest we make a public display, an announcement of your rebirth. A holy pronouncement, if you will. It will sow both fear and awe. Cersei did not like the notion of proclaiming herself an agent of Lawler. Yet, from the very beginning of this improbable resurrection, she had known it might come to that. The rumors were already swirling like a swarm of hornets. She might as well harness them. Fear was fear, whether it stemmed from a more mundane cruelty or something more mystical. I will address the people, she decided, on the steps of the Red Keep. Then I will preside over the punishment of any traitors we capture. That should serve as proof enough that I am not an illusion. As you wish, Melisandre murmured. I will make preparations. Cersei did not want to ask what those preparations might entail. Instead, she turned to the few men within earshot. You there, Ser Gondon, is it? Round up every retainer in this keep. Have them remove these bodies and scrub the floors. By midday, I want no trace of this uprising left. She gestured to the dusty windows high above. And throw them open. Let the city see the queen enthroned. Ser Gondon bowed at once and hurried off, barking orders to the remainder of the gold cloaks and sellswords. Soldiers in black-silver scale from the Brazen Chain also joined in, forming a motley crew that began dragging corpses away in earnest. Cersei felt only a small measure of relief. She remembered how she had once possessed a seemingly unshakable hold on the Red Keep, with lines of loyal Lannister guardsmen. Now she held it with sellswords and uncertain gold cloaks who changed their allegiance like shifting sand. All this had happened in a matter of days. She could ill afford to let her guard down again. She turned on her heel and strode from the throne room, ignoring the protests of her wound. Melisandre followed at a measured pace. The corridors echoed with the clang of steel, the shuffle of half-burned torches. Smashed furniture and scattered rushes bore witness to the intensity of the coup. Though Cersei had reclaimed the keep, she could see the damage everywhere. Splintered doors, broken banisters, bloodied footprints leading to dark corners. She suppressed a shiver of revulsion. This was not how a proud queen's seat of power should appear. She resolved to rectify it. Her old bedchamber was deserted, though signs of a brief search or ransacking remained. A knocked-over chest, an empty dresser whose drawers had been upended. She scowled. No doubt Farman or his co-conspirators had rifled through her possessions, hoping to find hidden gold or incriminating letters. She cursed them under her breath. Still, everything important had been moved or destroyed long before. All that truly mattered now was that she had the space back. She reached for the bell pull to summon handmaids, but the rope had been severed. She spat a curse. Melisandre stood in the doorway, regarding the chamber with detached interest. Cersei glared at her. I need attendants. Send for some from the city, if necessary. Of course, Melisandre said. Shall I also fetch what you might require for your wound? Cersei hesitated. Even the mention of it felt too vulnerable. I can manage well enough, she snapped. But she knew it was unwise to ignore the throbbing ache in her abdomen. Fine, gather whatever bandages and salves you possess, but be quick about it. Melisandre offered a small bow and left, her red robes swishing around the corner. Cersei exhaled and sank onto the remains of her once sumptuous bed. The mattress had been slashed, straw poking out. She felt a surge of rage at that petty violation. It was as though her enemies had wanted to strip her of every comfort, even in death. She pressed a hand against her belly, feeling the bandages. They were damp again. The sword had run her through deeply, a mortal blow that should have ended her story forever. That memory triggered a wave of nausea. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe steadily until it passed. It felt like a half-remembered nightmare, except the pain was all too real. She realized, then, that she was trembling. Clenching her fists, she told herself she was simply cold. With an iron will, she steadied her limbs. She was queen, risen from the grave. She had no right to tremble like some frightened child. If death could not defeat her, neither could fear. She heard approaching footsteps, and she composed herself. Two of Melisandre's followers appeared. A woman with braided black hair and an older man with lines of age etched into his face. Both wore plain red tunics, unadorned, as if they were acolytes in Melisandre's service. They carried a basin of steaming water, cloths, and small vials of pungent ointments. Without speaking, they approached the bed and set down their materials. The man inclined his head respectfully. "My queen, we come at the behest of the Red Woman. Shall we tend your wound?" Cersei did not relish allowing strangers to see her vulnerability, but she was practical enough to know she needed it. She nodded curtly. "Do it carefully." The pair moved with practiced efficiency, removing the soiled bandages and washing the crusted blood from her skin. Though they tried to be gentle, a spike of pain shot through her, and she hissed, biting the inside of her cheek. The black-haired woman murmured an apology, then spread a paste of dark green herbs across the jagged edges of the wound. A hiss of stinging warmth followed, but almost at once, a pleasant numbness set in. Cersei exhaled, relieved in spite of herself. "The Lord of Light blesses your second life, my queen," the man said softly, as he bound fresh linen in place. "That wound would have killed any other mortal." Cersei's eyes flashed. "I am no mortal, or so your mistress would have me believe." He said nothing to that, only completed the bandaging with deft hands. The woman rinsed her own fingers in the basin and patted them dry on a scrap of cloth. Then, with a last bow, they gathered their things and slipped out. Cersei sat up, pressing experimentally at the newly wrapped wound. The numbness helped, though she could still feel the deeper ache pulsing beneath. She found it slightly easier to breathe. She would not delude herself into thinking she was fully healed. That might take weeks or months, but at least she could better endure the demands of the day without keeling over. Rising from the bed, she surveyed the wreckage of her chamber. Smashed glass littered the floor near the vanity table. A mirror had been broken. She frowned at it, thinking it had been a small and precious item shipped from Mir. What a waste. Then her gaze fell on a battered trunk that still stood upright near the wall. She strode to it, bent to lift the lid, and found that some of her old gowns were still there, though scattered and somewhat crumpled. She rummaged through them with growing frustration. None of these were in good condition. Most had been slashed or dragged about. At last, she found a floor-length gown of deep burgundy velvet with gold trim that had escaped the worst of the ransack. Good enough for a speech to the crowd. Setting the gown aside, she realized she lacked any attendants to help her dress. Once, she had had a small army of handmaids, each vying to outdo the other in her favor. Now, she had only Melisandre's silent acolytes and a handful of uncertain gold cloaks. Gritting her teeth, she removed the simple black garment she had worn through the coup and, with care, slipped into the burgundy velvet. She laced the front herself, ignoring the difficulty, and then adjusted the fit around her sore torso. The bandages bulked it out a bit, but she would not let that trouble her. The effect, once arranged, was suitably regal. Deep color, gold accents reminiscent of House Lannister, and a flowing skirt that masked any limp in her step. She had no crown. "The last will root you out and burn you. Do not doubt me. You know what I have done to my enemies in the past." At that, more than a few people in the crowd shrank back, recalling the wildfire explosion that had immolated the Great September, or the countless acts of brutality rumored throughout her reign. Cersei pressed on. "Hear me well. The city stands at a turning point. Will you submit to the rightful queen who has survived even death to protect what is hers?" Or will you cower under false lords and illusions of safety? The choice is yours. Kneel or burn. Her final words rang out, echoing against the stone walls. For a moment, only the crackle of the braziers broke the silence. Then some in the crowd sank to their knees, heads bowed. A wave of kneeling followed, though others hesitated, or looked around to see what their neighbors might do. But the threat of immediate violence was too potent, and soon most every face turned downward in submission. A few, bolder than the rest, simply stepped back into the throng, refusing to kneel yet not openly challenging her. She let them flee. They would likely spread rumors of her fury and deepen the fear. That served her well enough. She lifted her arms in a gesture that was almost welcoming, though her expression remained forbidding. Rise then, return to your homes, your shops, your duties. The city must go on under my rule. Anyone who defies me will find out how keenly the fires of Lawlor burn. As she concluded, Melisandre stepped forward, raising her hands over the braziers. She murmured in that strange Ashai tongue, and the flames surged, rising higher with an eerie whoosh. The crowd gasped again, as if confronted with living serpents of fire. Cersei held her ground, letting the spectacle wash over her. She half expected the flames to catch her gown, but the surge was controlled, a piece of stagecraft orchestrated by the Red Priestess. It gave the impression that Cersei was shielded by these flames, that she stood within their protective circle, a rumor that would only magnify her fearsome aura. When the flames settled and the crowd continued to bow or back away, Cersei turned sharply and ascended the last steps into the keep. Melisandre followed. The gold cloaks formed up to block anyone from pursuing her. From behind, she heard the swirl of voices as the courtyard erupted in speculation and uneasy prayer. She felt a hollow satisfaction. She had made her grand statement, reminiscent of the old days when she had paraded through these streets in regal finery, though never before had she claimed the direct patronage of a foreign god. But times had changed. She had changed. Inside the great hall, she discovered that the bodies had been cleared at last, the blood scrubbed from the floors. The air still reeked faintly of death, but it was tolerable. She glided across the space, heading for the dais. Servants, some new, some she recognized, hurried about, placing fresh rushes, polishing bits of broken furniture. The high windows had been flung open, letting in sunlight that cast angled beams onto the floor. The iron throne glimmered with an austere menace. Cersei ascended the dais and took her seat, settling carefully so as not to aggravate her wound. Melisandre came to stand at the foot of the dais steps, her posture poised and watchful. A hush gripped the hall as attendants took note of the queen on her throne. For a few moments, neither Cersei nor Melisandre spoke. Then the Red Woman addressed her in a tone pitched low, for her ears alone. "So it begins anew, my queen. The city kneels, or pretends to." Cersei brushed an imagined speck of dust from her gown. "Pretend or not, they will obey. I have no patience for illusions of loyalty that turn into daggers." She glanced sideways, noticing two of the brazen chain mercenaries standing guard by a pillar. "Send a summons to your captain, Doreen. I want to see him." One of the Sellswords nodded and went to fetch the man. Melisandre remained silent, though Cersei sensed the priestess's watchful presence. She thought of how precarious the situation was. Her rule propped up by red-robed foreigners and hired blades. The gold cloaks were a step above Sellswords, but not by much. Their loyalties, too, hinged on coin or fear. That was the reality of the moment. She had to accept it and manipulate it to her advantage. Ravos Doreen arrived soon, wearing his black scale armor and a smug half-smile. He swept a short bow. "Your Grace, you look well enthroned." He cast a glance around. "Better than you did in that cellar a few nights past." Cersei's spine stiffened at the reminder of her desperation then. "Yes, let us speak of the future rather than the past." She steepled her fingers. "You and your brazen chain have helped me reclaim King's Landing, for which I will pay you as promised. But you must remain in my service a while longer, until I am certain that no other rebellions fester." Doreen inclined his head, We are at your disposal as long as the coin flows, and I'm sure there are new opportunities for profit. Indeed, Cersei said, Farman's conspirators will be discovered and executed. Their lands, their treasuries, whatever remains, will be seized in my name. You will have your share of that wealth, though do not assume you will pillage freely. You take your orders from me. Of course, your grace, Doreen said smoothly. We serve at your pleasure. His obsequious tone did not fool her. He was a sellsword, no different in essence from the likes of Bronn, or the countless other mercenaries who had paraded through the capital over the years. Still, for now, she needed him. She offered a curt nod. Go then. See that your men keep order in the lower city. Report any disturbances, especially any sign of lords or knights trying to incite further coups. I want them seized at once. As you wish, Doreen replied. He gave another half bow and departed, leaving Cersei to brood on the throne, the sharp edges of the seat digging into her back. She glanced at the line of minor courtiers who had begun to file into the hall, some old faces, others newly arrived with uncertain motives. She recognized a few petty lords from the crownlands, a handful of lesser knights, and a scattering of wealthy tradesmen who always found their way to court in pursuit of advantage. They approached hesitantly, offering shallow bows or curtsies. Their eyes flicked to Melisandre as if expecting the Red Woman to breathe fire at any moment. One by one, they knelt before the Iron Throne. Some stammered out protestations of loyalty, claiming they had never supported Farman. Others offered gifts, trifles meant to curry favor. Cersei listened, bored, though she occasionally pinned them with a cold stare to make them squirm. Beneath her poised facade, her wound throbbed, and she felt an ache creep into her limbs. She had not properly rested for days, but she would not yield to weakness now. She forced herself to pay attention when a man named Lord Osford Rosby was brought forward. He was a thin fellow with a wiry beard, known for controlling certain tolls on the Rosby Road. He bowed deeply, then cleared his throat. Your Grace, he said, voice quavering. I have come to swear my fealty anew. I only obeyed Ser Farman out of fear for my life. I would never willingly betray the crown. Would you not? Cersei asked with a hint of menace. How can I be sure you won't bend to the next usurper who brandishes a blade at your throat? Lord Rosby blanched. Why, your Grace, I have brought my entire fortune from my keep, a tribute to show my sincerity. He motioned for a servant, who carried forward a small but heavy-looking chest. Gold, silver, pearls from the Jade Sea, all for you. Cersei made a slight show of peering into the chest, though it was some distance away. She saw the glint of coins and a few strands of lustrous pearls. Not a fortune that would fund a war, but a sizable bribe for one lesser lord's resources. She lifted her gaze to Rosby. Your offering is appreciated. I will consider it a payment of the debt you owe for your disloyalty. It spares you for now, but if I hear even a whisper of further treachery, you will not be so fortunate a second time. Is that clear? He bowed again, sweat beading on his brow. See crystal clear, your Grace. You have my undying allegiance. She waved him off and he stumbled away. Next came Lord Bywater, who claimed to have shut himself away in his manor during the coup, offering neither help nor hindrance. A neutral man is a useless man, Cersei informed him icily, and commanded him to donate half his yearly income to the crown as a sign of good faith. He left with shoulders sagging. Thus, it went for the better part of an hour. Trembling or simpering figures, each anxious to declare they had never truly believed in Farman's cause. Cersei extracted heavy tolls from those she deemed suspect, while giving curt acceptance to those few who provided plausible tales of abiding loyalty. Melisandre watched from the side, occasionally shifting her weight or exchanging murmured words with her red-robed acolytes. Cersei pretended not to notice. She had no desire to give the priestess a role in these judgments. This was her power, her authority. At last, the line of supplicants thinned. She felt a sheen of sweat on her brow, though the day was not so hot. The strain of her wound and her growing fatigue made it difficult to remain rigid on the Iron Throne. Still, she did not shift or grimace. petitioner bowed out of the hall, she gestured for the doors to be shut. The echo reverberated, leaving a stillness. Servants bustled to tidy the floors anew. A few gold cloaks remained stationed by the pillars, stoic as she had ordered. Cersei let out a slow breath. The morning had been a success, or at least it had not turned into another fiasco. Fear and confusion still swirled among the populace, but that might serve her. Let them churn with rumors of the queen who had died and walked again. She glanced at Melisandre. "I trust you are pleased with all these references to your red god," she said with a slight sneer. Melisandre inclined her head. "Pleased or not, I only heed the truth. Lawloress flames guide me, and they have guided me to you." Cersei's eyes narrowed. "Why me? Why not some other fool with a crown?" The Red Priestess considered a moment, as though deciding how much to reveal. Then she said, "In my visions, I saw more than your face. I saw the shadows that swirl around you, the unquenchable fire that your spirit holds. You have walked through heartbreak and cruelty and come out stronger, an iron will that will bend the realm. And there is more yet to come. More." Melisandre's gaze was distant, flickering like a torch in a draft. "A threat stirs in the east, though the flames show it only dimly. There is also talk of a Targaryen bride across the sea, but I know not if she stirs. The flames hint that darkness still lingers in the far north, though not the same darkness that once threatened to consume the world with an endless winter. Something else. You stand at a crossroads, my queen. Lawloress' gift to you is not merely a second life. It is a second destiny." Cersei's mouth curled in skepticism. "I'm no champion for your cause, if that's what you imply. I have my own priorities. Perhaps they will coincide," Melisandre replied calmly. "In time, all things serve the light, if they would keep the darkness at bay." Cersei wanted to scoff, but a sliver of uncertainty wormed through her. She recalled her bizarre dreams, nightmares of a throne room engulfed in flames, of shadows dancing like wolves and dragons on the walls. She had dismissed them as the feverish remnants of her near death. Yet a part of her could not shake the feeling that something intangible tugged at her. She gave no sign of that doubt. She was Cersei Lannister, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, or what remained of them. She refused to be a puppet in any power's hands, mortal or divine. "The only threat I care about is the next fool who tries to take my throne," she said, letting her words ring with finality. "I will not lose it again." Melisandre dipped her head in acknowledgement. "As you say, still watch the horizon. Shadows come in many shapes." With that, she turned to speak to one of her acolytes, leaving Cersei to brood. Time crawled by as the day wore on. Couriers came and went with reports of renewed quiet in the streets. Doreen's sellswords roamed the harbor, dissuading any would-be rebels. The gold cloaks seemed content to maintain order rather than risk Cersei's wrath. She commanded that the city gates remain open, though with a strong guard. She wanted trade to flow in, for the capital needed fresh supplies, but she also wanted an eye kept on who came or went. She was painfully aware that she had not had time to re-establish reliable spies. Varys, the old spider, was long gone, and Qyburn had vanished or been killed after the Dragon Pit fiasco years ago. Cersei's existing web of informants had withered with her fall from power. She needed new ones fast, but that would take time. She took a brief respite in her solar, a smaller chamber that had been mercifully spared the worst of the Coup's destruction. There, she forced down some broth and bread. Every swallow reminded her of how little she had eaten since her resurrection. Her body craved nourishment, though her nerves made her appetite small. After a time, she dismissed the servants and tried to gather her thoughts. Tomorrow, she would begin the real work, sifting through the city for potential allies she could trust, refortifying the keep, searching for the fate of any surviving Lannisters who might stand with her. She mulled over the west. Casterly Rock was still a symbol of Lannister power, but her father's death and Jaime's disappearance had destabilized it. She was unsure who governed there now, some distant cousin or steward. In theory, they should bend the knee to her, but times had been chaotic. She resolved to send a messenger soon, once she had enough men to escort them. In the evening, She found herself drawn back to the throne room as if by an invisible tether. No formal audiences were scheduled, and the hall was mostly empty. Just a few guards patrolling the periphery. Lanterns and torches provided a dim illumination that danced on the metal swords of the Iron Throne. She approached it slowly, thinking of how many times she had sat upon that seat while the realm's greatest men bowed in uneasy homage. Now it felt tinged with an otherworldly chill, as if it carried the memory of her own death. She rested a hand on one of the twisted armrests, feeling the cool metal beneath her palm. So much blood had been spilled for this seat, she mused. Her children's father, Robert Baratheon, had once seized it by force, overthrowing the Targaryens. Then Joffrey had sat here, and Tommen after him. She herself had finally claimed it outright after Tommen's death. Each occupant had burned through their life or rule in a spectacle of tragedy. And now she was here again, resurrected, as if the Iron Throne itself refused to release its hold on her. She sank onto the seat, carefully, letting the edges of the metal press into her back. A question rose in her mind, unbidden. If she had truly died, had she gone anywhere? Had she glimpsed an afterlife or an endless void? She remembered nothing but darkness, a suffocating oblivion. Then she had woken to pain and Melisandre's face, chanting in a red haze. She shivered at the memory. Perhaps it was better not to think on it. A sound drew her attention. One of the guards near the hall's entrance came hurrying forward, halting a respectful distance from the dais. He bowed. "Your Grace, a man at the gates insists he carries an urgent message for you." Cersei frowned. "A message from whom?" He says it is from your brother, my queen. From Lord Tyrion." She froze, mind racing. Tyrion Lannister, her despised younger brother, traitor to House Lannister. How dare he send anything to her? It must be some trick or a ruse. Still, the guard's face was earnest. "Does he have proof?" she demanded. The guard swallowed. He showed a ring bearing House Lannister's sigil, with an inscription said to be private. He would not say more. Cersei's chest constricted. She knew exactly which ring Tyrion had once possessed. Their father had given it to him as a twisted gesture, or so she recalled, back when Tyrion had been Castellan of Casterly Rock for a brief period. She had all but forgotten it. If this messenger truly bore that ring, it suggested an authenticity. But how? Why now? "Bring him to me," she said, "with an escort of gold cloaks. If this is a ploy, I'll have his head." The guard bowed again and hurried off. Cersei's mind reeled. Tyrion had vanished from her life after betraying her countless times, or so it felt to her. He had served Daenerys Targaryen, had been rumored to wander Essos. She had cursed his name every time ill fortune befell her. If he was reaching out now, it could only be mischief or manipulation. She forced herself to remain composed, to remember she was the queen enthroned. She would not let him rattle her. Soon, the guard returned, guiding a middle-aged man with dusty boots and a sweat-stained tunic. 2 gold cloaks flanked him, weapons at the ready in case he tried anything. He carried a small satchel slung over one shoulder. Nervously, he advanced toward the dais and dropped to one knee, though he would not look Cersei in the eye. "Your Grace," he said in a trembling voice, "I come from across the narrow sea. My master bade me deliver this to you." "And who is your master?" Cersei asked coldly. "Lord Tyrion, Tyrion Lannister." Cersei's lips twisted at the honorific, but she said nothing. Instead, she extended her hand in a gesture of command. "Show me." The man dipped his head and rummaged in his satchel, withdrawing a small sealed scroll and a heavy gold ring. He offered them both with shaking hands. One of the gold cloaks stepped forward, took them, and carried them to Cersei. She accepted the ring first, turning it over in her palm. Sure enough, it bore the Lion of House Lannister, along with the faint inscription in High Valyrian that their father had once demanded. She recognized the shaping of the lion's mane. It was genuine, or at least a flawless forgery. Her pulse quickened with old fury and confusion. Then she examined the scroll. It was sealed with red wax pressed with the same sigil. She thought she detected Tyrion's distinctive scrawl in the quick lines of the signature. She considered ordering the man tortured at once, certain that the letter must contain some trick or poison, but curiosity gnawed at her. She broke the seal, unrolled the parchment, and read, "My dear sister, if you are reading this, I can only assume the messenger found his way to you through the chaos now roiling King's Landing. Or perhaps you are dead, again, if rumors are to be believed, and someone else reads this in your stead. But I will write as if you still live, strange as that may be. I have heard the most astonishing tales from across the sea, that you were slain in a coup and then brought back by a red priestess. If such stories are true, I suspect you might be in need of allies or at least resources. Your new condition likely raises questions. Rest assured, I have no interest in slaying you. I survived my share of near-death experiences, as you know. The Game of Thrones is a dance we've both partaken in too long. I propose a meeting, a parley, where we might discuss the future of Westeros. I know we have not parted on good terms, to say the least, but I believe we can be of mutual benefit. There are forces stirring on the seas and the continents beyond that may soon reach our shores. You rule the capital, but if the realm is not carefully managed, that rule may be cut short, no matter your miraculous revival. If you would consider speaking, perhaps even negotiating, send word through this messenger. He knows where to find me in Pentos. I await your reply, dear sister. Do not forget, though we have hated each other at times, we are still of the same blood. We share the name Lannister, and the realm may need every lion at its disposal before long. Try not to have this man killed. He's merely a courier. I am sure you have enough corpses to clean up without adding one more. Your brother in exile, Tyrion." Cersei felt her pulse hammering in her ears as she finished reading. She reread parts of the letter, seeking hidden jibes or clues. He was cunning, that much was certain, always had been. To speak of forces stirring was typical Tyrion, trying to intrigue and coax. To remind her of their blood bond was also typical, though it made her lip curl. They were siblings, yes, but her contempt for him was bone deep. Still, he had once possessed a formidable mind, a keen sense for politics, and a way of sniffing out threats. Could he actually be of use? She let the parchment slip to her lap, staring at the ring in her other hand. Tyrion Lannister, the little monster, the imp. He had made common cause with all manner of foes, from Daenerys Targaryen onward. Why would he wish to help her now? Possibly because he saw advantage in aligning with the occupant of the Iron Throne. Possibly because, despite all their hatred, they still shared a certain twisted loyalty to the name Lannister. Or perhaps he merely wanted to lure her into a trap. "Your Grace," ventured the courier, still on his knee. Will you reply?" Cersei collected herself. She did not like that her emotions had shown, even fleetingly. "What does my brother do in Pentos?" she asked, voice cold. He works with a merchant prince, Illyrio Mopatis, or so I was told," the courier explained, beads of sweat gathering at his temple. "He has some wealth there, it seems. Connections." Of course, Cersei thought. Illyrio Mopatis, the same ally who had once harbored Viserys and Daenerys Targaryen. Tyrion had also had dealings with that region in the past. The puzzle pieces fit too well for comfort. She tapped the ring against the armrest of the throne. For all her fury at Tyrion, she could not deny a slight stirring of curiosity. If new threats brewed in the east, perhaps the imp wanted to profit from them, or help her fend them off. Could she dismiss it out of hand? She rose abruptly, ignoring the stab of pain that caused in her side. "Leave the letter here," she said. "Guards, escort this courier to a cell. Keep him comfortable, but do not let him out of your sight. He shall remain until I decide my answer." The courier's eyes widened in fear, but he did not protest too vigorously, as if half expecting such treatment. The gold cloaks took him by the arms and guided him out. Cersei stood, gazing at the ring in her hand. The lion's face stared back at her, gold in the torchlight, reminding her of every heartbreak she associated with her dwarf brother. She felt Melisandre's presence at her side. The Red Priestess peered at the ring. "Another complication, my queen?" Cersei exhaled, teeth set. A letter from Tyrion Lannister, offering parley and warnings of threats in the east. A viper's words. She clenched the ring in her fist. I want to ignore it, but I cannot. He may know things I do not. Melisandre's expression was neutral. The flames often show me scattered images of the east, ships and shadows, powers rising. Perhaps your brother has glimpsed similar tidings. What do you counsel? Cersei asked, the question tasting bitter on her tongue. She hated asking for the priestess's opinion, but she was tired, and the swirl of events weighed on her. Melisandre's answer was simple. Listen, but do not trust. Let him reveal what he knows, if he truly wishes to speak. Then decide what advantage you can seize. There is no shame in gleaning knowledge from an unexpected source. Cersei closed her eyes for a moment, weighing the options. She could have the courier tortured for more information, but that might yield little besides confusion. Better to keep him in a cell and decide calmly how to respond. You speak reason, she admitted at last. I will think on it. With that, she turned to descend the dais steps, ring still clenched in her hand. The pain in her belly flared again, sharper this time, almost stealing her breath. She stumbled, and for an instant, the hall spun. Melisandre caught her arm, steadying her. Cersei hissed, pulling away as soon as she could stand on her own. But the ache would not relent. She felt faintness creeping at the edges of her vision. You're wound, Melisandre said softly. The strain of the day has taken its toll. I am fine, Cersei snapped. She forced herself to stand upright, refusing to collapse like some invalid. Yet her pulse pounded unervingly in her temples. Sweat beaded on her brow. She hated this so much, this frailty that refused to vanish. She had to rest, truly rest, or risk undoing what little healing she had gained since her resurrection. Melisandre's voice was calm yet implacable. Come, my queen, let my followers tend you again. If your strength fails entirely, your foes will pounce. Cersei wanted to refuse, to shout that she was no helpless child. But the black spots dancing at the corners of her sight told her she would only humiliate herself if she tried to walk unaided. She gave a stiff nod. Fine. Summoning her last shred of dignity, she allowed Melisandre to guide her from the throne room, ignoring the fearful or pitying stares of the guards. She could only guess what they thought, seeing the resurrected queen nearly collapse. Perhaps they believed her unnatural life was beginning to unravel. Let them gossip. She would show them she was unbroken soon enough. She was led back to her bedchamber, still in disarray, but at least the bed was replaced with fresh linens, the straw tick removed. Melisandre's red-robed acolytes stood ready with ointments and water. Cersei sank onto the bed, letting them remove her burgundy gown and loosen the bandages. The stench of stale blood rose, mingled with the sharper scent of herbs. She clenched her jaw as the pain flared anew, feeling as though the sword wound had torn open. One of the acolytes murmured, "She bleeds again." She heard the alarm in his voice. Another acolyte pressed a fresh cloth to stanch the flow, which had seeped through the old bandage. Cersei's vision blurred with a flash of white-hot agony. How could her body still be so fragile after the miracle that had restored her breath? Melisandre took hold of Cersei's hand, pressing it between her palms. They were surprisingly warm, as if lit from within by some hidden flame. "Breathe," she commanded softly. "Lawler does not grant life only to watch it slip away. Breathe, my queen. Embrace the light within you." Cersei despised the incantation, despised being helpless, yet she had no choice but to comply. She inhaled slowly, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes from the pain. Another acolyte cleaned the wound with a fresh mixture of pungent herbs, likely the same remedy used before. Warmth radiated across her skin. The stabbing pain ebbed to a dull roar. Her breath steadied. She realized that her right hand still gripped Tyrion's ring. It was sticky with blood, her blood. She forced her fingers to uncurl, letting the ring roll onto the bed. Let it remain there for now. Let the threat and confusion it represented remain at the periphery of her thoughts. She needed to focus on healing, at least enough to stand and fight another day. The acolytes finished binding her with fresh linen. Melisandre's murmur of incantations hovered in the air, a faint litany that felt half comforting, half invasive. Cersei closed her eyes, forcing herself to remain still. Hours might have passed in that haze of pain and chanting. At some point, she drifted into a shallow sleep, haunted by flickers of memory and dream. She saw her children's faces again. Joffrey twisted in agony, Myrcella pale and still, Tommen falling away into oblivion. Then she saw flames, red and gold, rising around a black silhouette of a lion. Far in the distance, she heard a voice like Tyrion's, mocking and cunning. Another voice, echoing with ancient power, whispered of a war to come. She woke to find the chamber lit by the glow of lanterns. Melisandre sat near the bed, as if keeping vigil. Cersei's body felt stiff and weak, but the savage pain was gone. She swallowed, tasting dryness in her throat. One of the acolytes rushed to offer her water. She drank, nearly finishing the cup in one go. The queen's voice emerged ragged. "How long was I asleep?" "Some hours," Melisandre answered. "Night has fallen." Cersei nodded, trying to assemble her thoughts. She felt feeble, but her mind was sharper for the rest. "What of the city?" "No riots, no open defiance," Melisandre replied. "Your cell's words and gold cloaks maintain a presence in the streets. A few minor lords left at sundown with your tacit permission. For now, all is quiet." Cersei closed her eyes, letting relief creep in despite herself. "Good. There is a matter that remains. The letter from my traitor brother. I must decide how to respond." Melisandre's gaze seemed to glow in the lamplight. "Yes, Tyrion Lannister. Will you parley with him?" Cersei licked her lips, recalling the letter's final lines. "Try not to have this man killed." She almost laughed at the idea that Tyrion, halfway across the world, still had the gall to speak to her in that wry tone. "I may invite him to King's Landing," she said, words coming slowly, "but only under conditions I dictate. If he truly wants to help me face these rumored threats, let him come to me on my ground. Let him risk his neck. If he refuses, well, that tells me all I need to know." Melisandre inclined her head in agreement. "A prudent course. If he does come, you can weigh his words. If not, you've lost nothing but the cost of parchment." Cersei began to push herself upright, ignoring the trembling in her arms. "Summon a scribe. I will craft my reply at once." Then she paused, squinting at the ring that still lay on the bed, stained with dried blood. She picked it up again, regarding the lion's face etched in gold. She felt no affection, only a swirl of old hatreds and new uncertainties. "If the dwarf tries to deceive me, I will tear him apart," she said quietly. She did not wait for Melisandre's reaction. After the acolytes helped her into a loose robe, she swung her legs over the edge of the bed and forced herself to stand. She felt shaky but determined. One step at a time, she crossed the chamber to a small writing desk, where an inkpot and quill awaited. Melisandre hovered behind her, but did not interfere. Cersei dipped the quill, pressed it to parchment, and began. "To Tyrion Lannister, the imp, who styles himself my brother, I have received your letter and your ring. You speak of parley and warnings of the East. You hint at knowledge that could benefit my rule. Very well. I am curious to hear these tidings. If you truly seek to aid House Lannister, come to King's Landing in person, alone or with minimal escort. You will swear to cause no harm within my walls. In return, you shall have safe passage to speak with me of these matters. The moment you betray my trust, you die. Make haste or do not come at all. I will not beg for your counsel. If you delay, I will assume your words were false, and I will treat any future messenger with the harshness traitors deserve. Signed by my hand, Cersei of House Lannister, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, by the grace of the Lord of Light and my own right." She scrawled the signature fiercely, a flourish of finality. She pressed the ring onto the parchment parchment briefly, leaving a faint smear of her blood as an unorthodox seal. Then she set it aside, letting the ink dry. "Have this delivered at once," she commanded Melisandre. "See to it that the courier is placed back on a ship for Pentos. We will watch him until he sails." Melisandre inclined her head. "It shall be done." Cersei sighed, feeling the exhaustion creep into her bones again. "Send him off at first light. Now leave me. I must rest if I am to be seen as strong at dawn." Melisandre withdrew, her footsteps silent, the door closing behind her. The chamber fell into a hush, broken only by the crackle of a small hearth fire someone had lit to chase away the night's chill. Cersei stood for a moment, gazing at the faint reflection of herself in the polished metal base of a candelabra. She thought she looked pale, older, her eyes ringed with shadows. But she was alive. This was no reflection in a funeral mirror. She had not died after all, or if she had come back. That was the single, unassailable truth. She would shape this second life to her will, no matter who or what stood in her way. She returned to the bed, lowered herself onto the softened mattress, and let out a ragged breath. The day's triumphs and revelations still swirled in her mind. Farman's death, the city's fearful submission, Melisandre's fiery display, Tyrion's unexpected letter. She felt as though the entire realm was shifting beneath her feet, like a great beast stirring in its sleep. Before drifting into restless slumber, she thought of the vow she had uttered so many times in her first life, that she would outlive all her enemies. Perhaps, with the Lord of Light's unasked for blessing, she would. But even if she was forced to share that blessing with Melisandre's foreign magic, she would use it for herself and for House Lannister. She would burn away every threat, carve out her dominion anew. Let the realm whisper and tremble. Cersei was here, enthroned in blood and flame, and gods help anyone who challenged the lioness returned from the grave. The next several days followed an uneasy pattern of consolidation. Cersei rose each morning, had her wound tended, and demanded her presence be felt throughout the keep. She ordered repairs to the battered gatehouse, the guard towers, and the battered courtyard. She reappointed some lesser officials, rotating them among tasks so no single one could entrench himself in a position of undue influence. Ravens were dispatched to the crownlands, summoning bannermen and minor houses to renew their fealty. A few responded swiftly with forced smiles and guarded pledges. Others sent half-hearted messages of neutrality, claiming to be too beleaguered by brigands or short on coin to travel. Cersei scorned them. Each day, she forced herself to appear on the ramparts or in the throne room, letting the city see she was no phantom queen. She wore her black or red gowns, colors that played off the rumors of her mystical revival. Soldiers spoke of how her eyes glimmered with the reflection of Melisandre's flames. Servants circulated stories that she never truly slept, that she prowled the halls at midnight, half-ghost. Cersei let such whispers spread unchecked. Fear was an efficient net to catch traitors. Now and again, her bandages had to be changed. Each time, she felt that pinprick of vulnerability. But the wound was slowly knitting. The Red Priestess's concoctions and chants truly did aid her recovery, though Cersei resented the hold it gave Melisandre. She tolerated the presence of the Red Woman because, for the moment, they sought similar ends, to solidify Cersei's power. But once she had no more need of the priestess, she would consider how best to extricate herself from such influence. Perhaps by then, the city would revere her so completely as a chosen queen that the foreign sorceress would become expendable. Amid these daily routines, the realm's broader issues nagged at her. She received vague reports that a fleet of strange ships had been sighted off the coast of Essos, but the details were contradictory. Some whispered of a Targaryen pretender mustering cell sails. Others believed pirates plagued the shipping lanes. None of it was definite. Cersei's newly reorganized court lacked the cunning spymaster she needed. It made her think again of Tyrion. Perhaps he truly was in Pentos, gleaning knowledge from the merchant princes. Or perhaps he was already en route to King's Landing, planning God's knew what. She forced herself to remain patient. If he arrived, she would have the upper hand. If not, that too was an answer. One afternoon, a rumor reached her that pockets of faith militant were reforming in the city. Armed fanatics outraged at her alliance with the Red God. Cersei remembered all too well how the faith militant had humiliated her before. She would not endure that again. She swiftly issued a decree banning any public gatherings of the faith, threatening immediate arrest for those who bore the seven-pointed star in a militant capacity. The City Watch carried out a few arrests, scattering the devout who might have challenged her. So far, that sufficed. The memory of the September's destruction still weighed heavily on the pious. Cersei used that fear ruthlessly. Occasionally, she found her gaze drifting to the sea, wondering if Tyrion's ship might appear on the horizon. In her darker moments, she almost wished for an enemy to materialize so she could test her newly fortified rule in battle. But she knew a war would strain the city's resources badly. King's Landing remained battered from the last round of conflicts, and its population was sullen, hungry, uncertain. Best to bide her time, gather supplies, reinstill discipline, and nurse her wound to full strength. Nights brought their own challenges. She slept fitfully, plagued by feverish dreams in which flames lapped at the foot of the Iron Throne while shapes skittered through the darkness. Sometimes she saw the outline of a three-headed dragon, other times a horde of pale whites, the memory of the threat that had once come from the north. She dreamed of her father's voice echoing in judgment, or of Jaime's face twisted with sorrow. Often, she woke drenched in sweat, hand pressed to the bandage on her belly. The pain reminded her that she was undeniably alive, a gift or a curse. She refused to accept it as a curse. She would twist it to her advantage. During one of these restless nights, she lit a candle and examined the mirror in her chamber, a replacement for the old one that had been shattered. By the flickering glow, she studied her reflection. She looked wan, with hollows under her cheekbones and a pinched look in her lips. Her hair, once golden and lustrous, had grown out somewhat since her humiliations years ago, but it lacked its old radiance. There was a harsh glint in her green eyes she barely recognized. It reminded her of Tywin Lannister in his later years, unforgiving, unyielding. She smoothed the candle flame with her other hand, letting it flicker across her face. An odd fancy came over her. She wondered if she could see a faint halo of red dancing in her pupils, a reflection of that secret fire Melisandre claimed she possessed. She blinked and the impression vanished. Perhaps it was only a trick of the candlelight. She exhaled, placed the candle aside, and forced herself to lie down again. Sleep eventually came, though it was shallow, filled with half-formed nightmares. Morning found her wearier than before. In time, word arrived that her letter had been delivered to Pentos. The courier had returned to the city under guard, reporting that Tyrion had not been there in person, only his associates, who took the letter and said they would ensure its prompt reading. Cersei felt a pang of disappointment and anger. Was her brother toying with her? She set it aside for now, turning her attention to day-to-day matters of rule. She had traitors to punish, taxes to collect, and a city to bring fully under her thumb. A week passed. 2 weeks. The city's daily life showed signs of returning to normal. Markets opened. Bakers sold their wares. Whores plied their trade in Flea Bottom. Tales of the resurrected queen became more outlandish with every retelling, but they did not disrupt the steady hum of commerce. Cersei ensured that any minor rebellion was quashed quickly. She ordered the heads of Farman and several of his key allies mounted on spikes above the gates, letting them rot in the sun as a warning. Food shipments from the Reach resumed as local lords realized she would pay for grain and produce. Some coin remained in the royal treasury, though not enough for comfort. She considered levying new taxes but feared sparking unrest. She had to walk a tightrope. Through it all, Melisandre lingered near, never pressing too hard. She seemed content to watch the Queen's progress and offer the occasional cryptic comment about fires in the east or the possibilities of forging a new era. Cersei humored her but never let down her guard. In private, she still cursed the Red God for binding her fate to this foreign shadowbinder, but she could not deny the advantage it offered. The rumors of her being chosen by Lawler had cooled some tempers that might otherwise have flared. People feared the unknown, They feared a monarch who had cheated death. Late one evening, just as Cersei was about to retire, a sentry rushed to inform her of a ship that had docked under cover of dusk. A vessel from Pentos bearing a small entourage that requested an audience. Cersei's pulse leapt. At last, perhaps, Tyrion was come. She commanded the sentry to bring the party to the Red Keep at once, under heavy guard. She dressed hurriedly in a black gown, ignoring the flare of pain in her side when she shifted too sharply. She summoned a contingent of gold cloaks to wait in the throne room. The hour was late, the hall dark save for torches. She took her seat on the Iron Throne, heart pounding with anticipation and dread. At length, the heavy doors opened. Lantern light spilled in, illuminating a small group. The gold cloaks led them forward, weapons at the ready. Cersei's gaze locked on the figure in the center. Short of stature, cloaked in a dark hood, she could see the stunted shape, the protruding brow and nose. Even from a distance, she knew that walk, that carefully measured gait. Tyrion Lannister. The gold cloaks halted him before the dais, forcing him to look up at Cersei perched on the throne. After a moment, he reached up and drew back his hood, revealing his mismatched eyes and that sardonic twist to his mouth. His hair was more gray than blonde now, his face lined with years of hardship, but the cunning glint remained. He half bowed, though there was a weariness to his movements. "Good evening, dear sister," he said, voice carrying that familiar rasp. "You look, well, considering recent rumors." Cersei willed her face into a mask of cold derision. "Brother," she said, letting the word drip with venom, "I am indeed well, better than you might have hoped." Tyrion's gaze flicked to Melisandre, who stood nearby, then to the ring of armed guards. A wry half-smile touched his lips. "Am I to assume your invitation of safe passage stands, despite the hostility in the air?" She regarded him with chilling intensity. "That depends on whether your words prove worth hearing. Dare you approach the throne, dwarf?" He gave a thin smile, stepped forward. The guards tensed but let him pass. He came to the foot of the dais and paused, gazing up. She realized in that moment how much had changed since their last confrontation, yet also how the old rancor between them simmered beneath every word. Tyrion's voice softened just a fraction. "I was sorry to hear of your demise, despite everything. But I see you found a solution." Cersei narrowed her eyes. "Spare me your false sympathy. If you have something useful to say, say it. Why should I not seize you this instant and repay you for all your betrayals?" Tyrion's expression hardened. "Because, dear sister, we both know you face more threats than you care to admit, and you need someone capable of dealing with them. Someone who understands the game you play. I've come to offer my counsel, if you'll have it." She leaned forward on the throne, letting a blade of the seat's forging press into her shoulder. "And why would you do that? For gold? You've aligned with Targaryens, with Starks, with Sellswords across the narrow sea. What's changed?" He met her gaze squarely. "I learned a few things about loyalty and survival during my time away. I saw realms overrun by chaos, and I realized that, in the end, we Lannisters are what remain of our father's legacy. However flawed that legacy may be, the name still has weight. We can use that weight, or let it be ground to dust by foreign powers. Your city is vulnerable. Enemies circle like crows. Whether you want a war or peace, you won't manage it alone." "Not truly." She studied him, suspecting a trap, but his eyes, though cunning, held a flicker of earnestness. If he was lying, he was a master of it. Then again, Tyrion had always been a master of lying. She hated him for so many reasons, yet she recognized that in this world of battered armies and broken alliances, he might indeed be a singular asset. He had once been Hand of the King, after all, and done the job better than most would admit. She let the silence stretch, letting him stew. Then, at last, she signaled for the guards to step back. "Very well, brother," she said in a voice as cold as winter's edge. "You will speak. But remember this, I am not the sister you knew. Death has taught me new lessons. If you betray me again, I will ensure that no red magic ever brings you back." Tyrion's lips quirked. "Understood, Your Grace. I appreciate the clarity." if aware that every guard in the hall was itching for a reason to gut him. Shall we discuss the threats that brew in the east, the possible Targaryen heirs, the mercenary companies forming a blockade near Lys? Cersei's gaze flicked to Melisandre, who stood silent as a statue. Then she returned her attention to Tyrion. Yes, we shall, but not here, not now. She gestured sharply to the guards. Escort him to a chamber. Post men at the door. He is not to leave except at my command. Provide him with food and wine. No poisons, no trickery. She looked Tyrion in the eye. We will speak on the morrow in private. I suggest you ready yourself, dwarf. Tyrion bowed again, more formally this time. As you command, dear sister. I am at your disposal. She watched as the guards led him away, his short figure disappearing into the corridor's shadows. A tremor of emotion flickered through her. A complicated blend of hatred, curiosity, and something almost like nostalgia for a time when life had been simpler. She crushed it. Her second life had no room for sentiment. Tyrion was a tool or a threat, no more. Whether they could forge a new alliance or whether she would eventually spill his blood across the throne room floor, only time would tell. Melisandre stepped up beside her. Well? The priestess asked quietly. Cersei let out a long breath. He lives for now. We will see what advantage I can glean from his scheming little head. If the Lord of Light truly wants me to hold this throne, let him show me the way to use Tyrion. Melisandre nodded once, and the flames of the nearby torches seemed to gutter in an unseen wind. The hour was late, and the candle of Cersei's energy was nearly spent. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions. She allowed herself one final triumphant thought. The queen who had died and returned was about to bend all fates to her will, even that of her despised brother. Let the realm tremble at the Red Keep's gates, for no matter what storms came, Cersei Lannister would stand, crowned in darkness and flame, ready to devour any who opposed her. She felt the Iron Throne's edges dig into her flesh again and almost smiled, letting the pain remind her that she was indeed alive, again, and, if she had